So in the last video, I talked a bit about, rejecting the shoulds out there, rejecting the shoulds on the internet, and running your business the way you want to run it. An interesting thing to think about sometimes is the expectations around how much people work. So when we lived over in Thailand, we came into contact with a very different work culture. So we were up in a village in northern Thailand, and the culture, I would say, or the living was primarily agrarian. I'm not sure what percentage of the money coming through was drug related, but aside from that, from what we could tell, it seemed like it was mostly agrarian livelihoods up there. So they would, they owned fields, or they would. I think they owned fields. It was a little bit unclear. Sometimes they would just clear land, like they would just like deforest kind of illegally, and it wasn't clear if somebody actually owned that land or if they just sort of claimed it. I'm not quite sure about that, but the work cadence was very different. So here in the U.S. we have a pretty set cadence, right? It's like Monday through Friday you work, and you work from 8 to 5, whatever your job is. Now, and then Saturday and Sunday you do other things. Now you might still be working. You might be working around the house, or you might be doing this or that, working on your pet organization or project or whatever. But you're still you're off of like your regular work, right? Now, of course, people also do work a lot more than that. There's people in demanding corporate jobs that put in a lot of extra hours, nights and weekends. Of course, there's people in shift type work, like in the medical field, where they're putting in 12-hour shifts, and they're doing 3 or 4 of those a week, and so they're working essentially maybe essentially 4 days a week, 3 or 4 days a week, and then having the other days off. So there is still a lot of variety inside even American culture. Then of course there's also a lot of part-time jobs too. So I mean there's people working a lot of random hours, but on the whole, there's a very kind of standard way to work, which is the 8-hour day, 5 days a week, total of 40 hours, and that's the typical. Well, in this village in Thailand, they would some of their work was extremely demanding physical labor. Like you were planting, harvesting, mostly by hand. Like they would have their little motorbikes or whatever that they would use to, somewhat to haul stuff in and out. So like I think there was like after they had harvested like corn or rice, and then I helped, with my motorbike. I think we'd ride up and down this skinny trail. I think and we'd haul it out to the main road or whatever. Um, but very hilly, kind of rugged country. So a lot of the farmland was on a fairly steep slope, and so you're going kind of more or less up and down all day, or at least maybe you're going with the contour, so it's not up and down all the time. But it's just a lot of like pretty strenuous physical work, and so they would go out there, and they were like strong, and they would like work their butts off for like a day or 2 or 3 days or whatever, just depending on what they had going on. And then they would come back to the village, or they would then they would have just like off days where like they didn't have, they might have been in a little like tin hut, depending on what their status was in the village. Now, a lot of people had nicer houses, like that were brick or block or whatever. Um, but on off days, it didn't matter whether it was Sunday necessarily, or Friday, or a Tuesday. If they didn't have any pressing work, it was just a day to relax, potentially. And so they might lay around inside their house or on their front porch pretty much the entire day, or maybe go and drink and play some cards part of the day, or like it was here, like growing up the way I grew up, right, with a fairly strong expectation around working is a part of how you prove to the world that you have value, and it's how you show you're a good, decent person. It's how you provide for your family. And and granted, my dad was self-employed, so he could take off random days, and I think he did some. But mostly, it was that Monday through Friday. He stuck to it, and that's how most people do it. And so, for me, with that expectation of like, hey, Monday through Friday we get work done, weekends we relax, it's a little disorienting, or it's a little just strange to be like, people are just like on random days of the week, they're just like laying around all day relaxing basically. And then other days are gone because they're out in the fields working, right? So it was, yeah, it's just, so it kind of brings the back to kind of the original question of how much should you work? On the one hand, the American work week is kind of a shorthand, if you will. And I think it has some value in the sense that it gives you permission kind of to relax on the weekend. So that's pretty cool. It's like, yeah, I've got to set. So for the most part, I've adopted that personally, right? So I work Monday through Friday. Now, being self-employed, sometimes I'll take a day or a half day off or whatever. I'll mix it up some. But for the most part, I know that Monday through Friday I'm working at my desk or doing a shoot or whatever. And then Saturday and Sunday Saturdays I'm often doing some type of work around the house. Or we're going off and doing something as a family or whatever. But generally it's that kind of a day. And then usually Sunday it's church and not much else. It's church and fun and relaxation basically, pickleball and whatnot. So I don't normally, on the one hand, like I really like that from a standpoint of like it's predictable. It gives me, like, Saturdays can be a little bit of a weird, strange day because I can still feel some like I should be working, I should be being productive. So if I sit around and watch a pickleball tournament all day long, I may feel a little bit like a a bad person. But for the most part, it's very easy because it's very like you kind of got it segmented. If it's Monday through Friday, I'm supposed to be working. If it's Saturday and Sunday, and then it's more chill. So in that sense, it's nice, but you gotta admit it's pretty arbitrary. Like in the Bible, God gave the command to rest for one day of the week. So that's not arbitrary. That's actually a something that God designed and that we can implement, I think, very successfully. So having a Sabbath day, I think, is excellent. I think it's, well, maybe not biblically mandatory. I think it's biblically supported. But beyond that, in fact, to have 5 days for earning money, one day for working around the house, and then one day for church and napping. You got to admit that the way we split up the other 6 days beside the Sabbath is pretty arbitrary. Honestly, it's pretty arbitrary. And so if you were to decide that, you wanted to spend 3 days earning money, 2 days working at a nonprofit, and 1 day working around the house, who's to say that's not just as legitimate? If you were to say, if 1 day of Sabbath is good, then 2 days of Sabbath is even better, and every Wednesday, which, some people do take a Sabbath on a Wednesday, or a Tuesday, let's say, every Tuesday, you're like, nope, today's also Sabbath for me, so I don't work today. I relax, I do fun stuff, and I pray, and that's it. Who's to say that's not totally legitimate? If one Sabbath is good, why wouldn't 2 or 3 be better? So it's, I think this is going to depend a lot probably on the family that you grew up in, as far as in the culture that you were surrounded with, as far as the value on work. I think for me, sometimes Saturdays I've struggled more emotionally than I have other days of the week because it's more open. It's more open to interpretation. And I may not have I may not be able to point to my productivity in my work as being my value as a person. And so it's, I think that we can actually use work as kind of a personal value crutch, if you will. And we can kind of our sort of we kind of use it as a basis for our sort of our self worth to some extent. It's sort of an easy proxy for us. Like, well, I got some important things done today. It's like, okay, well then I'm an important person. It's like, um, but I think it's good to not just adopt the culture automatically, but to think a little bit more about what are you called to. How do your personal rhythms of work and rest work better? Like, I would assume that some people can work at full blast 6 days a week and probably be in great shape emotionally. And then there's probably other people who either would need to work a lot shorter days during those 6 days, or maybe they can only work 4 days and really maybe they need a couple days, a couple Sabbaths to stay connected with God, to rest and recuperate. Maybe their work takes a lot out of them. Maybe something very stressful. Um, and to be a healthy person, maybe they need to just work less. Um, and so, I think it's good to not just take whatever the culture hands you, but to be intentional. And maybe you're a person who thrives on variety and variation. And so maybe for you, you're going to adopt an approach of like, I just work when I need to. So let's say you're self-employed, like maybe you just let the number of clients or the projects in front of you dictate how much you work. And then if you're a little slow, then you just take off. You just take more time off. So I think finding a good rhythm I think it behooves us, for the sake of our families, if we have a family, it behooves us, I think, to find a work rhythm that both allows us to support our families, but also allows us to be healthy as an individual and to have time for our families as well.